Good evening, Hilda. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You started climate activism in 2017 and founded Fridays for Future Uganda in 2019. You told me that the movement has now over 50,000 members in Uganda, spread across schools and universities. Your climate activism has received international attention, and you have been featured as one of the prominent young women striking for climate change in various news outlets. And for last year's UN-led climate conference, you coordinated a project together with the French embassy in Uganda to ensure youth perspectives from across Uganda would be heard in Glasgow. I'm also pleased to welcome Irene to the panel. Irene, you are currently doing your PhD at the University of Bonn Center for Development Research at the Right Livelihood College. Your research is mainly focused on farmer-managed regeneration of land, a method we will talk about today. You have already worked 10 years in Kenya for an NGO called World Vision in projects implementing this method of land regeneration. Ich veröffne den Abend mit dem, was Hilda bei einer Pressekonferenz 2019 gesagt hat.
Thank you. I am Hilda, and I am the founder of Fridays for Future in Uganda. I am missing my classes right now, same way I have missed them for the last 6 weeks to create climate awareness. It's not a surprise because I once missed 3 months of school due to the effects of climate change we experienced in my family and community. And my father wasn't able to raise my tuition fees. I am a victim of this whole climate crisis, and I am not ashamed to say so. After the massive effects of climate change in my home village, the heavy rains, the strong winds that washed away our crops, leaving the land bare, the constant dry spells that left the streams dry, my parents had to sell off our land and livestock to sustain our lives.
Thank you very much, Hilda, for this moving statement. Can you please tell us a bit more about this and why your family had to sell the land?
Thank you, Bettina, and the organizers for giving an African voice such a platform. And I'm glad to be here with each and every one of you today and to share the stories of our plight. Well, I shared my story, as you have just seen in a video, during the C40 World Mayor Summit that was in Denmark in 2018, because I felt like it was the best time and the right thing to do. On so many occasions, Africans are invited to speak about development, transition, about climate action, but not actually given a chance to share the stories of where they come from. So growing up as a child, as a young girl in Uganda, experiencing these massive effects of climate change made me a victim, not by choice, but by default, because I was staying in that community. And if anyone is given a chance to choose where they will stay, I don't think there's anyone who can choose to be in a climate change affected area. And by virtue of being in such areas, we, the victims of climate change, bear this responsibility of being in position and being able to do everything possible to combat this crisis. And that is why I use my voice and tell my story as a climate activist to inspire climate action from each and every one of us, from far and near. My family owned a plantation or a garden, and that was years ago. when I was about 6 to 8 years old. I grew up in this community, seeing everything on the table. We could have baskets full of fruits on the table every now and then. And as time went on, all this started to reduce. It all started to disappear. This wasn't the life I grew up in. I grew up seeing fruit, so I had to ask my parents, what's happening? We reached a time when we had to cut the meals from 4 to 2 to 1 a day, and that is how we kept surviving. And due to the different effects of climate change, like I shared in the video, the strong winds, heavy rains, our plantation was devastated by the impacts of climate change. And we had to sell off part of our land little by little to sustain our lives until we only remained with a plot where our house was. And my father then had to look for means of survival. So he had to travel from the village to the town in Kampala to look for a new job. And that is when he became a mason.
Were you and your parents aware from the beginning that you were a victim of climate change and that it was not just bad luck with the weather?
Being a victim of climate change is not a title, or it's because of the scars we bear, it's because of the effects we feel and witness each and every other day. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in Germany and be a victim of climate change. We have seen heavy rains, floods in Germany, even I think was last year and this year. So it doesn't have to be only maybe in the global south or a different, part of the world, but everywhere where climate change affects, there could be victims of climate change.
Thank you, Hilda. Irene, you are working against land degradation since many years now. Did you also feel personally the impact of climate change, similar to Hilda's experience?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I did experience the impact of climate change. I think early about 2010 when I started working, and my background is environmental studies, resource conservation, but my first job was more in the water sanitation and hygiene. I worked in a community where water was a serious problem, and women would go, I would hear the plight of women. They would share with us how they would walk kilometers, like 10 kilometers one way to go get 20-liter jerrycan of water back to the house. You can imagine how you share 20-liter jerrycan with a household of 5. And that tells you what is of priority. It's water for drinking. Then they are not even clean. Their self-esteem is compromised. Some of them who are pregnant, some got miscarriage. And so I saw the depth of the challenges of climate change in the water space, and looking at how these levels of deprivation and levels of vulnerability pushed communities to destroy the environment by cutting down trees for charcoal, to get money, maybe to buy water, or to allow the water vendors bring water close, or to sort out their family needs, propagate more destruction. So then the question was, how do we intersect development? How do we ensure that when one aspect is addressed, it's addressed holistically? So then my knowledge in environmental studies had a space in the interpretation of how water access can be sustainably in supply, and the recharge potentials enhanced by protecting the catchments. So I would start then integrating the need for tree planting. So I would train water management committees on the need to protect the water catchment so that the water supplies are safeguarded and that we can have more water, the streams can be revived, the springs can be revived so that we can have more water, the women can actually reduce the problems they are exposed to. we can have money from trees, because then if we grew plantations during that time, actually eucalyptus had really been the key business in the tree growing space. So then we supported schools to grow trees because they had big chunks of land. So we say, why can't you set up a nursery and grow trees so that when you need more classrooms, you can actually cut down, and once the tree mature, get money and fix your problems with trees. So that's how my journey with dealing with the degradation challenges started. Before then, I moved into the farming landscape. And in the farming space, the food security problem, the problem of firewood that women were facing. Now I moved into the nutrition issues. So the more immediate issues that actually are linked to degradation became my next venture out of the water sanitation and hygiene program that I had been implementing for like 4 years. And that is how I started working with communities in restoring degraded farmlands more, because then the opportunity to ensure that we build the soils, we improve food security, we address the livelihood needs that actually push farmers to destroy the environment are addressed. So that's how I transitioned, and to date in my current studies and more of what I'm campaigning for is a space where communities can drive the restoration agenda, because they are heavily impacted by the challenges of degradation, but they equally sit at the center of where degradation happens, because the choice to cut down a tree is with the farmer. The choice to protect a tree on the farm is with the farmer. So if they are not put at the center, if they're not at the driving seat of restoration, then we are not achieving the objectives we look forward to.
You're conducting your research in Baringo in central Kenya, and that is one of the many areas by a very severe drought, the worst in 40 years. And that is not only in Kenya, but also in Somalia and Ethiopia. And according to the UN, 36 million people are affected by this severe drought. And 2 districts in Somalia are at imminent risk of famine, and at least 20 million people are projected to go hungry between October and December. What was the last time you were in Baringo, Irene, and how was the current situation there?
I was in Baringo last week, just before I came to Bonn. So I left Baringo on Tuesday. I have been traveling to Baringo since I went back to Kenya to do my research, starting March, which was the peak of the drought. And it was very devastating to see how the farmers are at a point where they have to make choices between having the trees on their landscape or getting food by cutting down the trees. Because this is a context where farmers have been trained, they have been exposed, they're aware about the importance of trees. But then the question lies in whether to keep the tree and sleep hungry, or keep the tree and miss pasture for your livestock. Because if you do not have enough trees to get fodder, most of those farmers in Baringo take care of the acacia species. And in the acacia species, the Acacia Senegal, they are able to get the fodder from the leaves of the trees. So they cut this, in the adaptation model is to cut the branches and put them down for the livestock to eat. And if you don't have enough trees to keep your 20, 30 herds of cows, you need money to buy grass, pasture. And when you don't have that money, what happens is you have now to take down the mature trees, burn charcoal, and get money to fix the livestock problem, because livestock is their sole livelihood opportunity and the trees that exist in their landscape. So farmers are really at a very compromising situation as we speak. It's not only in Baringo. This is a problem in 23 out of the 47 counties in Kenya. It's a tough choice to make. whether to protect the environment or to die hungry. That is one. Number two, the farmers that have, those who took the message of restoring trees or regenerating trees, because the potential for regeneration is great in this context. Those who have more trees are actually having a different picture of the same story within the same context. So there are those who are really struggling. There are those who have lost their livestock. There are those whose livestock are healthy. There are those whose livestock are having shade where they get grass, they eat, they have enough fodder for their tree, for their livestock. They are getting milk, which they sell and get money. So we have two kinds of families within the same operating space experiencing unique challenges in the same context, showing you how the opportunities of restoration can actually change the opportunities households can have even in the midst of the climate crisis, because we cannot stop the drought. We have had drought for the longest time now. This is one of the worst, but how we prepare for this drought is probably the key question in responding to the crisis. So building resilience of these farmers for the future, which we expect in terms of tough environments, is very crucial in ensuring that they are able to sustain their livelihoods and sustain their lives, and the food security situation, which may not necessarily be addressed by the short-term growing of trees, but when they have some money to buy food as they mature the trees and they get money from other sources of the value chains that come with trees, like honey production, then their lives and livelihoods are sustained.
We will come back to how they grow trees and where they come from these trees a bit later. Thanks for sharing these impressions. I would like to share some photos with the audience first now to give them an idea what we are talking about. Das sind Fotos aus der Region Turkana. Das ist noch etwas nördlich von Baringo, also der Gegend, in der Irene ihre Forschung betreibt, im Westen Kenias. Ich habe diese Frau dort im Frühsommer diesen Jahres getroffen. Sie hat eben infolge der Dürre schon ihre ganzen Ziegen verloren. Sie hatte 20 Ziegen, hat jeweils die Felle dann abgezogen und getrocknet. Ich habe sie getroffen nach einer Regennacht. Das ist ganz typisch, dass nach einer langen Dürreperiode oder inmitten einer langen Dürreperiode dann Starkregen fällt und die letzten entkräfteten Tiere dann eben durch diesen plötzlichen Kälteeinbruch sterben. Sie hat die letzte Ziege in der Nacht verloren, hat das Fell dann auch direkt aufgespannt zum Trocknen und hat auf dem Arm noch 2 Zicklein, hat mir dann auch jeweils die Felle der beiden Mütter gezeigt und war aber wenig zuversichtlich, dass diese Tiere da noch überleben. Und das Entscheidende ist eben, dass die Viehzüchter angewiesen sind auf ihre Tiere. Also sie leben von der Milch, sie sind auch angewiesen auf sozusagen auch das lebende Geldkonto, wenn die Tiere überleben, werden welche verkauft, um etwas anderes anzuschaffen. Das heißt, wenn die Tiere sterben, dann haben eigentlich auch die Menschen kaum noch eine Chance zu überleben. Ein zweites Foto, eine zweite Frau, die mir in Turkana begegnet ist und mich da beeindruckt hat, war diese schon etwas ältere Dame, 68 Jahre alt, die auch ihr komplettes Vieh verloren hatte. Die war eigentlich relativ wohlhabend mit einer größeren Herde. Und weil auch ihre 3 Esel gestorben sind, war sie eben selber mit diesem Eselgestell auf dem Kopf unterwegs. Und das, was da drin war, ist ihr als einziger Besitz geblieben. Also der Wasserkanister, den man da noch sieht, und etwas Kochgeschirr und eine Zeltplane und eben ein Buch, um dieses Gestell tragen zu können. Und sie war jetzt auf dem Weg in ein Flüchtlingslager, was eben eigentlich für Flüchtlinge aus dem Sudan und für Nachbarländer ist, aber nicht für die kenianische Bevölkerung. Aber eben es gab für sie auch nichts anderes mehr oder keine Möglichkeit, ihre Existenz dort selber zu sichern. Und ich habe es schon angesprochen, die Kehrseite der Dürre ist dann in aller Regel Starkregen, Überflutungen, die wir ahnen es ja spätestens seit dem Sommer 2021, wie Hilda auch schon erwähnt hat. Hier eine Szene aus Uganda, dass diese Starkregenfälle, die dann sich abwechseln mit den Dürren, eben extreme Wetterereignisse, typische für die Klimakrise, sind letztlich für das Vieh, aber auch für die Äcker und für die Menschen ähnlich tödlich und ähnlich problematisch wie diese Dürren. Die Klimakrise führt auch dazu, dass Dinge oder Naturereignisse verschwinden und sich damit auch jeweils dann die Situation weiter verschärft. Der Kilimanjaro im Nordosten Tansanias an der Grenze zu Kenia, legendär eigentlich das Eis auf seinem Gipfel, aber infolge des Klimawandels wird eben auch diese Eisschicht kleiner. Und jetzt sind Sie gefragt, nämlich, was schätzen Sie, um wie viel Prozent das Eis am Kilimanjaro schon zurückgegangen ist in den letzten 100 Jahren? Um 30%, um 65% oder um 85% seit 1912. Also Sie können auswählen, Sie haben einen kleinen Moment Zeit, sammeln Ihre Antworten. Genau, der Kilimanjaro ist mit fast 6000 Metern Höhe der größte Gipfel Afrikas und auch ein beliebtes touristisches Ziel. Infolge des Klimawandels und der Klimakrise nimmt die Trockenheit zu, Waldbrände werden häufiger, also jetzt auch gerade am letzten Wochenende hat es wieder gebrannt an den Hängen des Kilimanjaro. Im vergangenen Jahr gab es auch ein Großfeuer, das dann erst nach Tagen unter Kontrolle gebracht wurde. Also da beschleunigen sich die Ereignisse. Genau, Antwort 3 ist richtig. Sie haben richtig geschätzt. Wir haben auch Bilder dabei, die das nochmal deutlicher machen, wie stark wirklich dieser Rückgang der Eisschicht auf dem Gipfel des Kilimanjaro ist. Im Vergleich die Bilder von 1993 und 2000, und das ist eben auch schon wieder 22 Jahre her, entsprechend kleiner ist die Eismasse noch auf dem Gipfel heute, und Experten befürchten, dass 2030 das Eis am Kilimanjaro ganz verschwunden ist, und das beeinflusst dann eben seinerseits wieder auch das lokale Klima in der Region, und es führt auch in der Folge zu weiteren Konflikten zwischen Viehzüchtern und Bauern, weil eben die Herden und auch aber die Wildtiere weniger Nahrung finden in diesen trockenen Regionen und stärker in die Felder der Bauern einfallen. Also das heißt, in dieser kleinen Region am Kilimanjaro kann man die Probleme der Klimakrise auch beobachten, auch die wirtschaftlichen Folgen, weil natürlich damit dann auch der Tourismus gefährdet ist, der für die Menschen dort auch eine wichtige Einnahmequelle ist. Ja, das war ein kurzer Einblick dazu. Hilda, you decided in 2017 that you wanted to fight climate change. How did you start your activism?
I started my activism right after a students' dialogue that was held at my university by a local non-government organization that is called Green Climate Campaign Africa. This local non-government organization came to my university to talk about climate change and the responsibility of youth. So a friend of mine just dragged me to this discussion, which really, really opened my eyes to the reality of what is happening in the world. And during the discussion, the speaker said that very little is being done to combat climate change because very few people know about the truth about climate change, and the ones who know the truth are not willing to take on the responsibility to combat or create awareness about climate change. And during this discussion is when I remembered what I passed through growing up: the heavy rains, the strong winds, the droughts, missing classes, and everything that I used to see in my village. So it drew me close to the discussion because I was refilling what I grew up facing. So it made me, it was like a spark in my life to what is really happening. And after this discussion, I remember talking to my friends and telling them, now that we know about climate change, we bear the responsibility of informing other people who do not know. So after the discussion, I talked to more friends about climate change and about what we can do. And
what I understood was that you learned to understand what you had experienced at university, and then you started to to fight against climate change. Whom are you addressing with Fridays for Future? I mean, in Europe, it is mostly for people at schools and universities. Are you also trying to raise awareness among people in the villages, or do you mainly focus on people in the towns and on young people?
So Fridays for Future addresses each and everyone because we believe we all have a role to play in combating climate change, and we all bear the responsibility. Although some people have more responsibility than we do, but we all have a play in this. So we usually target students, youth, individuals, we target communities that are really hit by climate change. We target leaders, we target government or non-government organization. So literally everyone that crosses our eyes. Yeah.
You also shared a video with me when we discussed before this event. And we would also like to share the video with our audience. So can you kindly describe what we are seeing here and what you are doing? Hilda, you are still muted. So this is apparently a clean-up activity at Lake Victoria, right? In Kisumu, you're collecting garbage, isn't it? If you
Yes, some of the activities that we do include the lake cleanups or the beach cleanups, where we literally go to the communities and especially those that are near water resources. We sensitize them about the need to protect these water resources. And we go on and clean the lake, show them what needs to be done, and teach them new skills of living. For example, we have a young women group which makes biodegradable briquettes. These biodegradable briquettes are an alternative to firewood, something that maybe Irene could share with her community. So these young women make these biodegradable briquettes from the waste we collect from the lake. So after the cleanup, we sort up the waste, biodegradable waste alone, plastics alone, and glass and other materials. So the biodegradable waste is used to make the energy briquettes that work as, firewood or in place of charcoal. So the plastics are given to a small organization that recycles this plastic to make other materials, such as book covers, such as bags for young kids in government schools, such as benches, chairs, and other materials. And then we dispose of the glasses and the other materials.
How does the Ugandan government react to your activities? Are they welcome?
So in most cases, we are not supported by the Ugandan government. For example, we have a recent campaign, or it's called Stop the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. And as what is happening on ground is our president feels that the oil in our country is going to develop our country, which is not the case. We have many oil wells, about 42 oil wells, and these are a potential of oil production in the country, and many people are looking up to this as a source of economic power. But in real life, this is not a source of economic power. It's environmentally, economically wrong, because it's putting a lot of biodiversity at risk, human life at risk, among other factors. And we feel that the government should be the voice saying the truth about the realities in our country, but they are doing otherwise. And in some actions or campaigns, um, they do support, but it's only the local government that supports. So it's only the local leaders at community levels who really understand the need for our voices, for the work we do, and how it's important to the public. So it's only the local government that really comes up and supports, and gives us space to talk to different groups of people, like fishermen, like marketeers, traders, farmers, and all these groups of people who are really affected by climate change.
You prepared a map for us that shows the oil pipeline that you are protesting against, the ECOP pipeline, which is the longest heated pipeline in Uganda, isn't it? So you already mentioned you're protesting against it because it is a threat to wildlife and to the environment. In your fight, you're not only blaming the Ugandan authorities, are you?
No, not only the Ugandan authorities. As it stands, Total Energies, which is a French company, is leading the project in Uganda. It already has another project called Tilenga that is also in oil production. And now it's looking at also constructing this other project, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline project. We believe that we are at a time when the world is transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energies, and big companies are aware about the devastation they have caused at our planet and are still doing so by greenwashing and promising, making empty promises. We know exactly what is going on, the climate change and the effects, and what really causes these effects is the gas emissions that are into the atmosphere. And companies like Total have been emitting for years and years and still are doing so. And that's why we reach out to them so that they can stop these projects, so that they can stop killing millions. And we also have a project without insurance, insurers who show interest in supporting the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, as well as bank institutions, to stop supporting this kind of a project and use these funds to invest in environmentally friendly projects like solar energy, like renewable energies, among others.
Thank you so much, Hilda. I would like to open or give room for the first round of questions from the audience.
Hello and good evening. We have one question at the moment from Klaus Koch. What are the shares of France and China who built the pipeline?
So in regards to the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, Total Energies owns 62% of the shares of this project. China owns 8% of the shares, and then the Ugandan government and the Tanzanian government each has 15% of the shares in this project.
Thank you. This is a cartoon, again, illustrating the protest against the pipeline. Irene, I would come to your research when we talked about your research and preparation for this digital event, and I asked you for some visual material, you sent me some videos and photos, which I would like to share with our audience. And the first video was a forest. And what kind of forest is it?
Yeah, so this is an FMNR plot. So this is farmer managed natural regeneration in practice in a farmer's piece of land. So the woman you see there is Nancy. She's the farmer who owns this piece of land, and she has been systematically regenerating the indigenous trees you see here. As you see them, this is barely 6 years plot, and none of the trees there have been planted. These are trees that are either were present, the mature ones were there before, but most of them she intentionally allowed them to regenerate, and she applied the model which I'm also doing research on, which is farmer managed natural regeneration as an approach to restoring degraded landscapes. And you can see her livestock are healthy amidst the severe drought. She is a happy person.
So where do the trees come from?
There's a forest underground. So the principle of FMNR is in any landscape where trees existed before, their root systems, by nature of dispersal, seeds go to the soil either through wind, through livestock, defecating, or wildlife. So when a landscape is given an opportunity to heal or to get restored, what becomes the barrier in most cases is interference. And this means that whenever trees try to find life or want to thrive, the livestock, either the goats or the cows, they stamp on them, they overgraze, they kill the top part of the plant, which is actually very fundamental to allow growth. Sometimes it's bushland. So many branches struggle to find opportunity to grow into trees, and they take in as much nutrients that would have actually supported one or two branches to mature into trees. So when the competition is reduced by pruning, so you take away, if there are 7 branches coming up, and you'll see in the next video, you allow 2 or 3 strong ones that you want to grow into trees, you thin the place, so converting the bushland into a more organized plantation of trees that are indigenous to the context is very important. Now, this lady is another farmer who is applying the FMNR model. As you can see, where she is operating is more of a bush, and in that state, it does not necessarily enhance the growth of grass. You don't maximize the output. Like what she takes away can actually be used as firewood. It can actually be left on the soil to rot so that we have the buildup of soil in terms of nutrients. So this is the systematic way of regenerating degraded landscapes where farmers do not need to bring trees conventionally into the landscape, but appreciate the existing potential. And there is very rich potential in regeneration in the arid and semi-arid areas where tree planting is almost impractical because the context appreciates the species that are adaptable to that context.
Is there any restriction of cattle population per hectare to avoid them eating the young trees?
When the trees are young, it's important to restrict livestock in, because otherwise they will still, suppress the growth. So once the trees have reached an age, so usually in this application of the model, you can actually keep off the livestock for 1 year. And in FMNR, we do not say you have to take the entire piece of land into restoration, because the farmer needs to continue with his or her life. And when you exclude the livestock entirely from benefiting from this landscape, then you're killing the livelihood of the farmer, and that actually puts them into the destruction part. So they take a portion and then they restrict the livestock from that section. Once it is good enough to allow livestock get in, you move to the next section. So systematically, you are able to regenerate more of your farm, and ultimately, you can now utilize the farm in a more productive way. How do you keep livestock? Maybe I need to respond on that. The farmers do not, most of them do not have enough money to buy, barbed wire to fence. The beauty is that the trees, the species of trees, some of them have the thorns. And so when they do the pruning, they use the waste to make the fences. And when they use that waste to make the fences, of course, livestock cannot get in. But as the trees mature and the fences become more weak, then it is not necessary to fence anymore. So those who have the ability can actually fence using live fence like the euphorbia, the sisal. Those who can do the barbed wire can do the same. They usually even reinforce with the branches that they use from pruning. But those who are not able to, they can actually use the pruned branches. But more importantly, we empower the communities to appreciate that they themselves are the fences, because the livestock is yours. Now, if you decide to restrict it from the same way you grow crops and you do not allow livestock to eat your maize or beans, why is it not possible for you to restrict livestock from moving into the place where you are allowing natural regeneration to happen? So farmers can actually control their livestock, and especially where they're regenerating plots next to their houses, it has really been successful.
Maybe we keep the questions for later. I would first like to share the photos, the other photos you sent me, and ask you why you sent them or shared them with me and what we are seeing. So that is apparently the extent of degradation very close to your area of research, is it?
Yes, this is actually within the research area. When I was in the field, I in the course of the travels I got to this point, and it really challenged me to see the future of what this landscape could look like if nothing happens today. If no action is taken, then the depth of degradation will separate families. The depth of degradation is going to take away every valuable piece of the land that these smallholders have. And one of the farmers told me that because most of those farmers, some of them have even 100 acres, and that's why they could leave part of their farm to get to this level of degradation. But over time, they're starting to see the waste in their 100 acres they own, because it cannot sustain their livelihoods, it cannot sustain their livestock. And one of them said, Irene, it is having 1 hectare of land and having 100 hectares where we are living now is almost the same, because we suffer the same challenges, and none of us are able to, operate in the best way possible with these climate shocks. And that means if you do not, protect your 1 hectare, you are the same as 100 hectares wasted. So degradation is real, and this is the fear I have, even as I do my research, and in the communities where nothing is happening and we are continuously seeing the charcoal burning going on. The fear is if we continue keeping quiet, if we continue doing nothing, then we are going to have more of these kinds of landscapes, and we all perish.
Yeah, you also sent me a photo showing people burning charcoal, right?
Yes. So this is one household I interviewed, And I told you that this was around March, and there's the livelihood opportunity. There's no farm. And if there is a farm, there's no maize because there's no rain. And the alternative they have is they are doing, the husband of this lady does the motorbike business. So they do the transport business. And so the woman just stays at home, and what they can bring together on the table to sustain their food production and children's school fee and health is the trees that are around them. So they cut the mature trees and burn them as charcoal, and the husband integrates it in the motorcycle business because they also have to pay loans. You know, the motorcycles are taken by loan. So if you don't pay the loan, the motorcycle is taken back. So you have to find all means of ensuring that you are paying the loan with the motorcycle, but you're also addressing your livelihood needs. And it's a big threat. And the motorcycle business, in my thinking, and as I saw in the community, is one of the incentives to charcoal burning, because it's very quick to carry 5 sacks of charcoal to the nearest Nakuru town, and you take charcoal, and the cost of charcoal is also high, and the demand is so great in the urban. The rural communities don't use charcoal. They have enough firewood, they can prune the trees or cut, and they're okay. But the demand is in the city. And because motorbikes are so many, and young people are not going beyond, you know, high school, or they stop school at some level, they don't have any job to do, they focus on charcoal. This is in Marsabit, women in restoration. These are women coming from a very tough context. Marsabit is in the northern part of Kenya, a place where drought hits the most. You have seen this in the media. This is a place where in March and February this year, they were giving their livestock cotton because there is no grass, you know. So these women took farmer-managed natural regeneration at a point where the nutrition problems were at the peak, and their husbands go with livestock far away, and they remain home with small stock. And the small stock don't have anything to eat, and their children equally don't have anything to eat. The small stock need to give them milk. So how do they get fodder to ensure that this small stock they remain with can get food? So the opportunity in restoring degraded landscapes, once they got the knowledge, came to their awareness. And I'm so proud that they took the initiative, as frail as they look like, as you know, they didn't go to school, most of them, but they understand restoration in their local knowledge, in their local perspective, and they apply it in the understanding of their context. They're, for me, the greatest champions in a context that is as tough as Marsabit, where it rarely rains. The challenges of water is so high, but you see the trees behind them are purely because of natural regeneration.
Thank you. That was really impressive. The FMNR method has been developed or invented in Niger some 40 years ago. And we have some satellite images to show you the impact. So the first one is in Niger in 1975. The black dots are the trees. And in 2013, we see the same area. So we see there's more population, or it's more densely populated, but we also see a lot more trees. And then there's another similar image or images to compare, also an area in Niger, same more population, but also at the same time more trees, thanks to this same method Irene just described to us. Before we open for the questions from the audience, I have 2 last questions to the 2 of you. With the beginning of the war in the Ukraine, Europe is trying to shop more fossil energy from Africa, so more oil and more gas. What do you make of this? Do you see there's an opportunity for for African governments, for African countries to get more income, more jobs from this interest of Europe in fossil energy, or should Africa resist the European demand for energy? Maybe first to Hilda.
Thank you, Bettina, for that question. So, as an African who has lived on this planet for 25 years, I haven't seen an African country develop on oil. Therefore, Africa is an agricultural continent. We are agriculturalists, we are farmers, and that is what we have been for years and years. And I believe this is the only way to go, because one, you cannot depend on oil for survival. We cannot depend on oil for survival. We can depend on food, on plants for survival, because that is why we have been surviving for all this while. So oil as an alternative for development in Africa is a no-go, because we have seen live examples of oil producing countries in Uganda. These are in Africa, these are the countries that are suffering grave environmental challenges. Take a look at Nigeria. They have devastating effects of climate change because of this. Even outside, take a look in Europe, in USA, in Asia, oil producing countries have great environmental challenges. They face challenges of oil spills. If oil spills happen, for the example in Uganda, if an oil spill happens, it will be a disaster to almost 5 or 6 East African countries, because a third of this East African crude oil pipeline is passing through Lake Victoria Basin. And we know that Lake Victoria is a source of livelihoods for over 40 million people. That means putting these lives and livelihoods at stake, not mentioning aquatic life. And we depend a lot on tourism, on agriculture, and fisheries. And this is why we have been surviving. So in case of this oil spill, it will be a great disaster to our lives, to our economies, but also to wildlife and development. So Africa has a chance to invest in renewable energies, to invest in agriculture, to invest in sectors like tourism and fisheries, which have been helping it grow for all these years. And I think if this potential is fully invested in, Africa could develop like many leaders really wanted to.
Thank you very much. Irene, what is your answer?
I think this is a one of those catch-24s. Oil is a recipe for conflict. We have seen this in many African countries where there's oil. And even in my own country, Turkana County has oil, and it's one of those counties that has had persistent conflict. I am almost certain the moment the value increases with the demand that comes, I fear for the stability of the nations that are going to take this path. And I would say probably it's a moral issue which both the African government and the European government should really think about holistically, because you are dangling a carrot to a vulnerable, person in the state where they are at the most in terms of vulnerability. It is important to note that 600 million people are excluded from electricity in Africa, yet we have these sources. It's also important to note that we are struggling with bringing the temperatures down to below 2 degrees. And Africa has very little contribution to this. Now, that the path that we are probably being the incentive to take the path, and it's not an intentional incentive, because again, the Russia and Ukraine issue is not necessarily, this is where conflict becomes a unique problem that is going to promote emission in a very interesting perspective. But going back to this, the path of energy, we have consistently in the last decades been preaching renewable energy. And Africa's development is compromised by the energy options we have in a way. Oil exists, but the ability to exploit it and the challenge of climate change becomes the reason why Africa may not get to the heights it could and the complexities around it. Now, if we are going to take this path now, yet we are really at the tipping point of the climate change challenge of global warming and the temperatures, then I think we are probably in a united front heading towards the breaking point. So we need to think holistically about the path we want to take as we deal with these issues. The investments on renewable energy are still high. It is more driven by the West because Africa is not still developing solar and all this stuff. The market is also compromising in the sense that most of the products like solar, you get substandard items in our markets. So when communities with the little money they have attempt to take the direction to use renewable energy, they get items that get destroyed in 1 year or 2. So then the investment is not worth it, you fall back. So there are many factors that need to be thought about holistically as we take the direction, and even as Europe explores and window shops for renewable energy because of the conflict, they need to think about it holistically because they can actually find countries that are definitely, because most of our governments are looking at money. So our governments will be, happy to consider this path. But the question is, we are struggling with adaptation funds. Africa is facing the adaptation challenge. To what extent are we going to continue emitting and exposing our vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, and who is going to bear the cost?
Thank you very much. I would now like to open for the questions of the audience.
We have more questions about the pipelines. So, for example, Total needs official permits for its pipelines, and is your fight against more pipelines being heard by your politicians? I think it's a question more to Hilda.
I didn't hear the first question properly, but the last question about if our voices are being heard, well, I would say they are being heard but not listened to and not acted upon, because we've been saying over and over again how climate change is impacting us and how this pipeline is going to cause more emissions, how it's displacing thousands of people, how it's a threat and a challenge to biodiversity. But the government doesn't seem to support us because it's supporting the construction of the pipeline. So they are hearing us, but they're not listening and acting because they have their own benefits or their own reasons as to why they support the pipeline.
Yes, thank you very much. And there's a question about cooking. So do you think that cooking with wood is one of the problems? And do you see a change in cooking behavior, or have the people other possibilities?
People are changing their cooking behaviors, especially on the source of energy, because more trees have been taken down and the challenge of accessing firewood is becoming more real in many households, and so the cost is going higher. And that means that you need to now look at more energy efficient ways of utilizing energy to cook. So rural households have adopted energy efficient cookstoves that actually use less firewood to cook. There are people who in the urban places and even in some rural places that have replaced charcoal with briquettes, just like Hilda mentioned before. Their government has made attempts to reduce or to subsidize gas, the LPG, so that people can actually manage to cook using gas, as opposed to depending purely on charcoal or firewood. There's also the cooking pots that have moved into the market, like the ones that you can actually boil beans in 30 minutes, the pressure cookers. And more urban households are starting, because they're saving on energy. Electricity is still very expensive, and very, very few households are able to manage cooking using electricity. We also have fireless cookers. So like women are making this kind of baskets that you can actually put food that is semi-cooked, and it's able to cook itself without necessarily exposing it to fire. And rice, you can actually semi-cook rice and move it to the fireless cooker, and it gets ready over time as you do your work. So there's a lot of things that are changing in the space of cooking, and it's actually influenced by the cost of energy and the pressure in the deprivation of trees on the landscape, and the cost of accessing firewood. So a lot of changes are happening, and people are starting to adjust. If governments were able to improve the subsidy, strengthen the policy environment, because controlling charcoal burning is one of the things that is still a big problem to our countries, and it's a cross-border issue, because if they ban charcoal in Kenya, we get it from Uganda through the Lake Victoria. They come in boats and they're clearing, the islands there of trees. So it really needs a consolidated effort between governments and regions, and people really need to be given alternatives that are cheaper, that can actually address their cooking needs to be able to transition to clean energy options.
Thank you very much. Perhaps one last question. So I think it's more to Hilda. How do you spread your thoughts, your ideas, your theories? Which platforms do you use for it?
So what we do is, one, through storytelling. So it depends on the community you are in. So sharing your story can help inspire and motivate other people to take action. And also we use social media to create climate awareness, especially in the youth, but also internationally, for our voices to be heard and shared with different people. We also go on the grassroots in the community and create sensitizations, create trainings where we teach people about climate change, and then do climate activities, different climate activities depending on the regions. So in the areas that are affected by droughts, we have a project we call Empowering Young Women on the Front Lines of Climate Change, where we support 100 young women to build and grow sustainable vegetable food, and to be able to, they have already food stored in their houses to sustain their families. And in areas that are faced with, for example, floodings, we have these awareness drives, but also tree planting, and we also sensitize community on the need and importance of growing these trees, especially alongside the slopes. Because if you just plant trees and do not tell the community what these trees are meant for, the next time you come back, the trees will be cut down and used for firewood or for any other things. So we also sensitize communities, and we also write letters to leaders, especially in our country, to inform them about the demands of the community or of the youth or of the students. And we also organize youth events. For example, 3 weeks back, we organized a Mo COP27 event, where we had youth from different regions in Uganda come together for 2 days for a workshop to brainstorm recommendations that will be presented by a delegation to COP27. These youth recommendations are piled together into a report, and they will be given to different leaders, different organizations, different medias at COP27, so that these voices can reach far and wide. So those are some of the ways we spread our messages.
Thank you very much, Hilda. So perhaps one last question from Mrs. Bühnow. How can you convince the farmers to do regenerative agriculture if they are starving and would need the money to feed the family? What alternatives would they have?
Yes, I thought we are off time. I typed the feedback. So I said, one, farmers can integrate regenerative agriculture progressively as they address the food security problems they face and the livelihood improvement needs. Because even in their starvation, they always attempt to, with the hope that, they will get some crops out of their farms. Now, in that process, you can actually support them to apply agriculture in a way that can improve the ability of what they expect to get back to be better. And depending on the state they are in, farmers are not happy to receive relief every year, okay? So if they're in an emergency situation, they need relief. But as they receive relief, there are many programs like World Food Program have approaches of cash for work or food for work, which can actually be implemented in a way that supports improving the landscape to be more resilient to the shocks of climate change, or improve the ability of these farms to actually produce better. So if a community is in the state of Turkana, when you have a cash for work or a food for work program, why can't you use this model of giving the communities the money as they regenerate, or they protect the trees or fence off areas, or they do the soil and water conservation structure so that when it rains, grass can actually come back? Then in that sense, they're eating from the money they receive, but they are putting their energy on something that is reducing their vulnerability to the to the challenges of climate change. So if that happened in 10 years, I can assure you that Turkana in those regions would not be having, see their livestock and children die like they do. But sometimes the approach in addressing farmers in this emergency is a problem, because people just think about the current state. They solve the problem now, come back again. You want to solve them every year in that manner, and then you make people more vulnerable, and they perish at the end of the day, or they have to leave the area and have to look for other places, and conflict now starts building, and many ripple effects, cause even more damage than good.
Thank you very, very much. This was the last question, given the time. It was really a pleasure having you, Hilda and Irene. Thank you very much for your insights and inputs and your answers, and all the best for your political and scientific fight. Thanks, vielen, vielen Dank auch an Sie, liebes Publikum, an die beiden Dolmetscherinnen Jutta Himmelreich und Heike Kirschner, an Iris Käbelmann dafür, dass Sie den Chat im Auge behalten haben und die Fragen im Auge behalten haben. Und natürlich an Yvonne Pöppelbaum in der Regie. Und wenn es Ihnen gefallen hat, sind Sie gerne in einem Monat wieder dabei. Dann geht es um die Digitalisierung in Afrika. Vielen herzlichen Dank. Herr Dr. Pieler, wollen Sie noch etwas sagen?
Yes, from me as well. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to listen to you. You did it so lively and so precise with your answers. You were so precise with your answers. It's a pity that we have to close, but very much like to go on and hear from you what you're doing, and it's really inspiring. And this is why this series is called Afrika Inspires. Thank you very much.